What is up, everybody? It is Scott the Dog Dad here from dogdadofficial.com, and I am sitting down today with Billy Hoekman. I didn't say it wrong this video. And we are going to be talking about AAFCO and why they're important, about the AAFCO meeting that happened this year, some big takeaways that you guys need to know, and just really informing you guys about what AAFCO is, the role that they play, why it's important for our pets, and why it's important for you guys to be informed about these things, especially if you are mixing fresh foods with some kind of, traditionally available pet food. So, Billy, thank you so much again for joining me, and I'm glad that I was able to strong-arm you into this additional interview by asking you live last time. I will keep that strategy in mind. Unfortunately, this isn't live, so I won't be able to do that. But
no, that's true. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm always glad to hang out, and especially this is pretty important based on kind of what you said, and that it really goes back to most owners are using a pet product of some kind. Even if you're making your own food, typically you're buying treats at a store, you're doing something that falls under this umbrella of regulation. And so, but also, if you have advocates watching this, it also helps for them to know, even if they're not using any pet products, right? They're making their own diet, they're doing things. They have friends that are definitely using pet products. And so just in terms of helping as many dogs and cats as possible, that's kind of, where people, or why people need to know the information.
Right. Completely agree. And for those of you guys, really quick before we get started and I start drilling Billy with questions, for those of you guys that do not know, Billy works with Answers Pet Food. And I apologize. I know you sent me a message this morning about your new title, but what is the new updated title for Billy at Answers Pet Food?
I am the Nutrition Science Director.
AKA, he has this massive brain and it's full of pet nutrition information. So we need to be listening to this guy. And by the way, I have had, including myself, from our last interview, had several people make changes in their diets, including adding reproductive foods and increasing organ content, including myself. So changes are already being made from that.
Oh, that's great. I'm very happy to hear that.
And if you guys are curious, no, there was, man, I don't know what's going on with my voice. No, there was no weird cannon butt or anything like that from the increase in organs. All is doing well over here. So I highly encourage you guys to go and watch that video. Yes, it is very lengthy, but it is super, super worth it. So go and check that out.
Well, we're not known for being short-winded at Answers Pet Food. We can talk for hours and hours, so that doesn't surprise me.
Well, with that big, massive brain, you've got lots of information to dump.
Well, and I will say for the record, too, I am drinking bone broth again, second interview. So just throwing that out there for the record.
I'm not anywhere near as healthy. I'm drinking coffee right now.
Hey, I am addicted to coffee, and so I hear you on that one. This is just the mid-afternoon broth. So,
my name is Scott, and I am a caffeine addict. No. All right, so let's jump into this. So, Billy, tell us, what is AAFCO and why is it so important for pet owners to know who they are and what they do? Okay,
so AAFCO is the Association of American Feed Control Officials, and they've been an organization for about 100 years. And so what a lot of people don't know is AAFCO doesn't have any actual regulatory power, okay? So one of the things that people don't really, I think, know on a regular basis as well is that when you're a pet food company like Answers Pet Food or Purina or whoever, right, any pet food, they have to register in any state they want to sell. So if I want to sell in California, I have to register there. California has different laws than Washington, that has different laws than Oregon, that has different, everyone typically has different laws. Now, AAFCO was actually formed about 100 years ago to consolidate and have one standard across America, right? Now, this will tell you how good they are at their job. They've been trying to do this for 100 years, and it hasn't panned out yet. So, selling pet food, like we're sold, I believe, in you can get at least one of our products in 48 states. Currently not Hawaii and Alaska, which I've been kind of pushing for Hawaii just so I can go there, but that's kind of, well, and Alaska too, but not currently. But it's not that easy to be a pet food company, because you might say, I'm going to submit my stuff to Colorado. And in Colorado might say, well, we don't, our local laws don't support this, this, and this, right? And then you might change that, and a state that already approved you might be like, well, but we don't. So you're kind of like walking a tightrope in terms of the regulation. Now, where AAFCO comes in is AAFCO they adopt a certain set of ingredients, science. I'm going to put that in big air quotes, right, in terms of doing that. So they adopt something called the OP, which is the official publication, which anyone watching this can buy. I believe it's $125. It went up by $25. So the ironic thing is, in order for you to know what's in your pet food, you have to pay $125 to get the actual ingredient definitions from this big, thick book that they put out every year. So like I said, it's called the OP. It's the official publication, and that's what you have to look at when you're producing food. So a few examples of how that works is, for instance, we now have 6 varieties of cheese treats. We initially had 3 varieties of cheese treats, and it was ginger, turmeric, and spirulina. Now, we had to go into the OP, into the flavorings and additives section, and there was about 30 things we could choose from. So let's say we wanted to put bee pollen in there or something. We just can't do it, because any state that's AAFCO compliant will not approve your food for sale, and you just won't be able to sell in their state. And so we're all working within this ridiculous limitation. And they are the ones who deal things as safe for use. And essentially the standard for safe for use is, does it actually poison a dog? No. Then we'll consider it safe for use. And I'm going to be annoyed with myself because I'm not going to remember what it is, but there was an ingredient that was approved. So essentially it goes through a process. It's like kind of like a review process. And at the end, it's the final, can it be included in the OP, and can you include it in your food? And there was a type of meal that was approved to be used for protein in pet food, and it's a extract of biodiesel fuel.
Was it the yellow something or other that you brought up in our last chat?
No, so that was yellow grease. That was a so what they're doing with this is they're using I can't, and again, I'd have to relook at what the plant is, but they're using a plant source to make biodiesel fuel, and then from that process there is leftover garbage materials, and that's what's approved for use in pet food as a protein source. And the reason why, the reason why is because they'll literally say at these things that it's recycling, that if we don't put this stuff into pet food, it will go into landfills and it'll fill up landfills. This is what they actually say at the meetings.
Why do I feel like there's a lot more to be learned about that?
Exactly. And so what I would argue to that is, instead of saying farming and the way we do it is going to produce X amount of garbage per year, so we need to put that garbage into the pet food so it doesn't go to land food, let's maybe look at the way we farm and stop doing subsidies and stop growing so much corn and soy and how we run that. So wouldn't it be better to go to the beginning of the problem rather than to say, well, it has to go somewhere, and so we're going to feed it to dogs and cats.
Isn't the best way to mitigate and deal with a problem to prevent it from happening in the first place? Prevention is easier than medicine.
Exactly. And so, and then the other part too is they control the labeling of the product. So if you look on like our label, for instance, we can put on our box of patties, let's say, we can put on there, grass-finished beef. We can write fermented vegetables. We can write fermented cod livers. But if you look at our ingredient panel, that's the one probably heavily regulated part of pet food. And so essentially, here's a good example. We use Celtic sea salt in our food, not only to ferment food, but also to help remineralize what you lose from over farming, because the soils are becoming depleted over time, right? You can look at data and see that. We can't use the word sea salt. We can only put the word salt on our label, which this is not exactly sea salt. This is Selena natural sea salt. It has a way different mineral profile. So keep in mind that you can now, use yellow grease in your food, but we can't put the word sea salt on our packaging.
And isn't the yellow grease, I believe I remembered you saying something about the definition for it is not very specific. It's just...
yeah, it's half unidentified animal fat and half used cooking oil from restaurants.
So it's unidentified food and used oil.
Yes.
You can use that, but not sea salt.
Yeah, exactly. And another good example of that is we can't put the word fermented on our label because fermentation doesn't have an ingredient definition in AAFCO. So we can ferment foods and put them in, right? We can put our kombucha, for instance, and that ferments our beef and pork dog food, is listed as decaffeinated green tea. What does that tell you about it? That's totally different from, right? And then the other qualifier that's very interesting is they control meat and what you can label meat as on an ingredient label. So for instance, our beef is very different from any beef in the industry, right? This is grass-fed, grass-finished beef that is, GAP 4 and 5 rated. This is as good or better than the grass-fed organic beef at like Whole Foods or Co-op or something that's going into this food, right? We pay a lot more. I would take that to task that we pay a lot more than anyone in the industry. Now on our label, we can only write the word beef because there are no qualifiers. You can't put grass-fed, you can't do any of that stuff, and that's because the people who make the laws are the large corporations.
Right. And for those of you guys that don't know, there is a difference between grass-raised and grass-finished. There can be, look it up sometime, way off topic for this, but look at feedlots and not being grass-finished, those things, but there is a difference.
Know your farms.
Which makes that frustrating that you can't put that on a label because it's a big difference. Even
Yes.
if you have that grass-raised cattle, if it's not grass-finished, then it's still a very different thing, that's frustrating.
You negate everything you did.
Yeah, that's frustrating.
Right, yeah.
So before we start getting super mad about that, so who went to this event and why was it so important for you guys to be? Why? I know it's not free to walk in the door. It's actually fairly expensive to go.
Yeah.
So who went and why exactly is it important for you guys to be there? Why pay? Why show up? Why deal with these super stimulating and entertaining moments?
Oh. Why deal with the most boring experience in your entire life that you've ever encountered? Well, I do want to touch on one other thing in terms of how the regulation works.
Go for it.
So the other part too is, you have the OP and you have these ingredient definitions, and you wonder to yourself, who decides this? Who is AAFCO? Who decides this? So AAFCO is made up of state regulators and lobbyists, essentially. So there was about 450 at this last meeting. So if you can imagine, there's this group of 12 of us in the corner that everyone doesn't like very much. And then,
sheep.
Exactly. I told one of the people I'll talk about is Susan Thixton, and I told her, I always say that the minute you're at AAFCO and you sit down with her, everyone has a different opinion of you in the room. So if you speak too much truth, that's kind of what happens, in terms of doing that. But so essentially you come into these meetings. So whether it be the pet food meeting or the ingredient definitions committee, you come in there, everyone's sitting in chairs with microphones, so you can go up and say things to the committee. Now, one of the tricks they do, which annoys me so much during it, is when they don't want to talk about certain things, like they don't want people to publicly comment on them, they do too much on the agenda. So literally every meeting I've ever been to, they'll leave 8 or 9 things that they just don't have time to talk about. And it's a hard cutoff. The meeting doesn't go past 2 p.m. if it ends at 2 p.m. And so that's one of the ways they can do that. Now, the people who actually work on these committees, on one side is state regulators, and on the other side are lobbyists. And the way that these pet food companies get on there, let's say you're huge billion-dollar pet food companies, because they can't go on. I couldn't be on a committee and say, I'm going to represent Answers Pet Food. Right, that'd be a conflict of interest. So what they do is they form groups like PFI, or they form groups like, you know, a renderer could not get on the committee, but they can have a render lobbyists association, and then they can go up and they can do it. And in fact, that's what once killed the notion to maybe use qualifier on meat, was the render lobbyist stand shot up, that we can't do that, and it was dead, right, within a second. So what you have is these large corporations actually making the law with the regulators themselves. And so the system is built to cater to people not like us, or to protect the consumer. It's to recycle waste product and put it into pet food. That's the whole reason the pet food industry was invented, and that's in 99% of the cases today, it's still the reason why pet food is around. So it's a little bit maddening when you're there.
So without sounding too, tinfoil hat about it, it's basically a big group of really powerful people with lots of money paying to make laws the way that are going to benefit them the most and allow them to continue to profit.
That's no tinfoil hat there. That's 100% exactly exactly correct. And so, yeah, it's and we'll kind of get into why there's a lot of different reasons why people would go. And I think it is important to highlight the people who go, because as you said, it's $500 to go to the meeting. And we had a few consumers at the meeting in this last one. And so it's not cheap. And then you put that with hotel and food and plane. And I mean, you're talking a $2,000 trip right there if it's not in the city that you live in.
Right.
And so there's a lot of great people. And maybe at the end we can talk about, we're trying to think about what we can do in the future and having more consumers there.
Right.
Because that would be, in my opinion, the most powerful thing that we could potentially do.
Make those 12 people 20 or 30 or 40.
500.
There you go.
Exactly. Imagine there was more consumers there than regulators.
I mean,
that would be
that's what they really
coolest
care
thing.
about. The people that are spending the money, right?
Exactly. So that would be like the coolest thing. So do you want me to touch on kind of who is there and why?
Yes, because I think that that's really, really important, because when it comes to, lending time and support and watching their videos, consuming their content, just interacting with them in general, I definitely want to highlight those people, because like you said, if they're sitting through this ridiculously boring set of sessions and spending the money, then I definitely think that they should be highlighted.
Oh, absolutely. So, and if I look down, it's only because I'm making sure I get the names right here.
Sure, Billy, you're just checking Facebook. We know.
So the first two that I'll talk about, I'm sure that a lot of people know who these two might be, and that's Barbara Royal, who's a veterinarian out of Chicago. She runs a sort of a raw feeding university here in California. She's done a lot of work, obviously, in the holistic veterinary community. And then Natasha Lilly is who actually is a vet who works with her. That was the first time I ever met her, but I may have met her you meet so many people in passing. But, and they're just doing a lot of general work, and they were there essentially to say, how can we add support to this, movement, and say, and have our voice be heard, because bodies count and minds count, and that sort of thing counts. So they were there, and they also brought now I'm going to, and can I just say, if I get someone's name wrong, and they watch this, I apologize. And names are like one of the worst things, but they have a friend that they work with named Tammy, who works a lot with some of the other people I'll talk about, who has been coming to the AAFCO meetings, and who's really good in terms of strategy and how we make our voice heard from like a legal perspective. Now that's my perspective. I don't have the insight in exactly the projects everybody's working on, but that's kind of where I sit, and I'm kind of just going around the table here. So obviously me and Roxanne, my boss, was there. Roxanne is so she does all the procurement of, so me, Jacqueline, and Roxanne, who are my two bosses that are sisters, we all kind of work the science angle of the company, right? In terms of new products, in terms of formulation. But Roxanne is kind of what I would say is like the head lab geek. So she's absolutely brilliant, and she's one of my mentors for sure. And she's actually like the lead formulator on like our food products. She's the one who deals in regulation. She's the one who deals in procuring. If we're doing our chicken formula this week, right? What do we need to do that? So my goal is to one day take her job, and she knows that. So, but I'll give her some time on that. So we go there because we work with these people. So we have a different role. We can't, you can go up to the mic and say whatever you want, and there's a lot of brave people in this group that go up there and call people out. We're not in the business of doing that because we're working with these people, right? We want to be able to sell our pet food. So this has helped us tremendously by virtue of the fact that we can know a little bit more about the regulation, but also know the regulators face to face, because there is gray area in these ingredient definitions. And if you can get a win on that, it really means the difference between putting something that's really good on the market or, having to compromise, which we won't do. So it'd be the difference between putting something out or not putting something out. So,
right.
And Roxanne has, aside from Susan, who I'll talk about in a second, Roxanne's been going the longest. She's been going for like 8 years now. And I go to one a year, which is the bigger summer meeting, and Roxanne goes to every single meeting. So she deserves a lot of props for that. So also there was Karen Becker, Riding Habib, and Daniel Orrego from Keto Pet. You've probably seen them all, together all around the world. They were there basically not only in support of us, but also in support of, we had 2 consumers there whose dogs actually passed away. Well, one passed away, one almost passed away, consuming some I don't typically talk about kind of other products, but consuming some suspect other products. And Susan actually got a meeting with the FDA and got those consumers to be able to say what they wanted to say. And I know Roxanne got to say, and so people actually got to speak directly to the FDA and say, listen, this is where we're coming from, and this is what we want to change. And we are an actual voice in terms of doing that. So also Susan Thixton, who's the true first coming to every AAFCO meeting and holding these companies accountable. And she has an organization called the Truth About Pet Food. And she actually has now a delegate for her organization, and his name is BC. Have you ever met BC? He's from Indiana, really tall guy.
I don't think so. I heard lots of chat at Super Zoo about him, though.
You should know BC for sure. So put that on your priority list. No, he's a retailer in Indiana. He writes for Pet Product News. He's actually been a huge advocate for me. I consider him to be a really dear friend. And he also now sits on 2 AAFCO committees, the Ingredient Definitions Committee and also the Pet Food Committee. So for Susan's organization. So he actually gets a say, on these things. And BC is just, your quintessential Midwesterner who's very polite. And so he's a very good guy to stay level-headed and stay on there. But, I can't say enough about what Susan's done in the last, I don't even know how long she's been going, 10 years or something like that, and what she's had to endure from some of these corporations. She does very, very good work there. And then also I can't forget about Chelsea Kent, who is a store owner in Colorado, and she also is on she is also on AAFCO committees. And that was just by virtue of saying, hey, I'm going to start an organization where retailers can be represented there through me. And, she's paying all that money to go there. These committees, you're not paid to be on them, right? These are, you can join them, but it's just free, you're working for free. And so, a lot of really great work. And then there was, some local people who came out, to have dinner with us. And I want to say, again, someone's going to kill me for this, Augie's in Fort Lauderdale, and the owner and the manager were really great there. And then the two consumers that came out were amazing as well. So it was actually the largest group I've ever seen at one of these events before. And one of the things we were talking about doing was, we realize it's not that easy for a consumer to pay $500 to come into the meeting, right? If it's somewhere.
And hotels and flights.
Yeah. But maybe, just maybe, in my little dream world, maybe we could, once we figure out where, the meetings are actually, this next summer meeting is in Louisville, Kentucky. Maybe there's enough people in Louisville, Kentucky that are actually thinking they want to make a difference, and we could get a strong number of people out there. And imagine if there was a day when there was as many consumer advocates as there was regulators.
Right.
That's when I think you could really get a lot of change happen.
Yeah, because just the numbers aspect of, like you were saying earlier, 12 black sheep in the corner versus we need a bigger location because there's 500 of these people, it's a much bigger impact to them to say, okay, well, we need a different venue because we have so many of these people on this side of the fence that are coming. Huge difference.
Exactly. And I remembered someone I forgot. So Kathy Elenovi, who lives in Florida now, she has Next Gen Pet Food Manufacturers, which is an association that represents small manufacturers, and we're a part of that. And so she gives them a voice at AAFCO as well. And all these people have had to endure being treated ridiculously. So a good example, and this is, I think, the meeting before I started going, but they were talking about, I believe they were talking about, so these people also regulate feed, right? They regulate what the
Cow feed.
Yeah. Cows you eat, the milk you drink, they regulate the feed. And that's just as bad, right? And so one of the things they were talking about, I believe that this is correct. I know for sure that this is the case, but I'm pretty sure it's pertaining to this specific instance. They were talking about feeding cows grocery store waste because you can do that legally, right? I think it's up to 10% can be grocery store waste. Now, what they were talking about doing was not requiring the farmers to remove that waste from its packaging. So
What?
Now you're talking about cows eating plastic, right? So
sea salt's not okay, but plastic is.
Exactly. And then there was another one where they were approving, I believe they were approving a zinc supplement for like reptiles or something like that. And this zinc is essentially used to clean roofs in Florida, right? It's not a great, they're looking to use it after they're done with it, right? So they can make more money on the sale of the waste of the product. So Dr. Kathy gets up and says, this could be a problem. We might want to I'm a veterinarian. We might want to look into this or whatever. And literally the whole room booed her until she sat down.
What?
A group of adults. And after that, a gentleman who was lobbying for that specific ingredient came up to my boss and her and said, you hippies are going to ruin the world, and your guys' hair is really thin, so you must be vegetarians.
Wow.
Wow. So I know. And so it's kind of like, I wasn't there for that. I feel like my hackles would have gone up if that would have happened and I would have been there. Not that I'm incredibly tough or anything like that, but this is the environment that you walk into when you do that. And I always notice when I'm walking around, because I look a little bit different than most people there. And I notice people constantly.
There's not a lot of tattooed guys showing up, piercings.
No. So I notice people reading my badge a lot. Their eyes always shoot down to like, why is he here and who could he possibly be? That kind of thing.
Right. Who's this thin-haired hippie?
Which is ironic because my boss, Roxanne, is not, it's no secret that at Answers Pet Food, we all eat a lot of animal products and meat ourselves. And that's no secret, but also she has like very thick, full hair, which is kind of like funny. I think he was just kind of throwing out whatever he possibly could.
Oh, it's so frustrating. So ridiculous. I mean, how can that even be? Oh, we could go off on 1,000 tangents, but how can you say you don't need to remove the packaging? Like,
oh, it's insane. Now imagine too, you can feed your cows, I believe, again, it's up to 10% of their diet can be chicken litter, which is what's left over on a chicken processing room's floor after they're done. So now you take this animal that's only genetically made to eat one thing, and that thing's grass, right? We know that grain-fed beef is unhealthy. We know that grass-fed beef is healthy. Now you're taking that animal and feeding it chicken feces in parts. What is the nutritional cost of that? I don't want to be the guinea pig for doing that, especially when you talk about, phthalates in your milk from eating packaging of some kind of plastic product, right? I don't want all of those estrogenic chemicals going into my body. And so essentially, this is why it's important, not only in the food industry, like the pet food industry, but the human food industry, to know where your food comes from, because no one is actually protecting you. Most people would think, okay, I know if I buy food, it's at the grocery store for my dog, it will be safe because it's government regulated. Totally false, right? And that's the sad part, because I gave a talk about I did one speaking tour this year, and I gave a talk about the 5 myths of pet food. One of the things I talked about was that the myth that affects most people is that pet food is safe because it's government regulated. I mean, we all know people who buy pet food at, a Target or Walmart or something like that. And so the number one thing people should take away from this is know where your food comes from that you eat, and know where your animal's food comes from. You have to know the producer. You have to verify how these things are done, because if they're not, then people are cutting corners 100%. I'm in the industry, so I see it all the time.
So basically, if we look at this, what really happens is that if you can feed an animal or a person something that doesn't immediately make them sick, then it can be approved for distribution. Yeah,
that's at least to my best recollection, that's kind of how I see it, because they're not even, I mean, and that goes back to the argument about like carbohydrates, right? If I feed my dog a carbohydrate, if tonight I decided to feed Lua a carbohydrate-rich meal, would it hurt her? Would it poison her? No. But if I continue to do that over time, that's when you'd start to see, her body not functioning properly, right? And so that's what AAFCO needs to focus on, is the best possible diet. But that's not going to happen until consumers realize that it's on them to sort of make that change, right?
Until there's 500 thin-haired hippies at the AAFCO meeting saying, we don't want this anymore. We don't want to spend our money on these things that are making our pets sick anymore.
Exactly. And that even goes to your food. I mean, if somebody wanted to attend the AAFCO meeting and learn about what goes into the food they eat, that's a big deal as well, right? So if you consume animal products or meat, you want to know about the regulations of, and again, that goes back to the OP, right? You can figure out what these animals are fed. My other favorite example of sad example of the feeding of other animals was the Skittle truck that rolled over. I can't remember what state it was in, and everybody's like, why are there old Skittles going somewhere? And they were going to be fed to cows. So again, what is the nutritional cost of a cow that eats Skittles?
Why? What? Maybe they're trying to produce rainbow-colored milk.
They'll tell you it's a good source of dietary sugar and et cetera, et cetera. But by the way, what a lot of people don't realize about cows is that they're eating grass. But this is just a little fun fact for you. They're eating grass, but their stomach actually turns all that into saturated fat.
which is super interesting.
Yeah. So just side note, cows. I know cows are vegetarians, but their diet consists largely of saturated fat. That's what me and cows have in common.
That is just crazy. That's crazy. This is also mind-blowing, inspiring, and amazingly frustrating all at the same time. Like, all at the same time. I don't even know if I'd make it through a meeting. I'd like end up walking out just so frustrated and upset. I mean,
well, that's why I think
plastic and Skittles, like, really?
I think that's why I think certain people aren't allowed at meetings. I work for, as I talked about Roxanne, and then Roxanne's sister Jacqueline. They have two decidedly different personalities. Roxanne is very much on the quieter side, very on the chill side, and Jacqueline can get fired up about things very easily. And I told her, I was like, if you go to this, your head will explode, and then I'll have to run things. So please don't come to these meetings, because I think people would just go crazy. I think it was funny because of the people I know that are extremely passionate, I've told Jacqueline she can't come, and then Dana Scott, who is the founder of Dogs Naturally magazine, who is very passionate. I was like, if you're going to kill someone if you come, so you definitely can't be there. And I say that in the nicest way possible, because it's that passion that gets the change in terms of what, for instance, her magazine has done in terms of getting good debate and good information out there in the public sphere.
Right. Yeah, even just speaking to her for 5 minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes at Super Zoo this year, you could feel that the passion, the energy, maybe you shouldn't go to the AAFCO meeting energy coming off of Dana. So I totally get that. And I might have to take that advice as well, because I'm sitting here flustered just hearing about these things. Like, I'm tempted to name this video like 2018 AAFCO meeting, feeding cows plastic and skin.
Well, and then the other idea too, could be, even if next year in Louisville people can't go to the meeting, they can come to the hotel. They can talk to regulators. They can talk to these people. There's nothing stopping you from walking up and saying, "Hi, I'm a consumer and I'm concerned. Do you have a moment to talk to me?" And maybe they won't, but at least you tried at that point, right? So there's, we're all just doing the best we can. I try to keep it in perspective and say, we're doing a lot to help as many dogs as we possibly can. And we'll just keep our head to the ground and do that. So.
Yeah, and that is a very good point to make, because it's really easy with all these things that we hear about with carbohydrates and the effect that it has, plastic and Skittles, good Lord. It's really easy to get frustrated and overwhelmed, as I'm very obviously demonstrating, but it's more important to try and help and talk about things. Like when the whole Purina and Champion pet foods and all that stuff came out, it was really easy to get frustrated. But instead, I decided to chill myself out and make a video to try and educate people and tell people what was going on instead. So they can make informed decisions on what was going on. So that's a really good perspective.
Absolutely. And I think that, that specific case outlines another big problem in the pet food industry. And that is, outside investment, just generally, because, I can only speak for myself and, the pet food company I work for. But because we don't take on outside investors. I mean, that's a huge problem in the industry, because once you take on outside investors, those investors have to make a certain profit every year, and they have to make more every year. And that's when you start to see, you lose your control, and you lose that initial core that you started with that said, we're going to make a healthy pet food, we're going to make the healthiest thing possible. You lose that. And that's when so as soon as, and I'm not calling anyone out specifically, but what I mean is, when it comes to a human product or a dog food product, as soon as an investor buys it, it's done for. Here's a good example of that. I really enjoy this place called Farm Burger I think they're mostly in the South, but I ate at one in Berkeley as well. And Farm Burger, I love cheeseburgers, huge fan. And so,
Who's not?
but I only eat a certain standard of meat, right? So I only eat grass-fed burgers. So they have 100% grass-fed, grass-finished burgers. You can get a side of bone marrow. Like it's a great place for people who choose to eat like I do. But I heard recently that there were 3 different larger corporations that were vying to buy them. And I said, well, as soon as they're bought, that's when you're going to start to see that, for instance, that grass-fed is going to turn into we use Angus fresh beef or something ridiculous that means nothing.
Right.
Same thing in pet food, same deal. If you see a company outrageously explode in growth, let's say they come out with 10 new products in a year and you're like, what is happening? Check to see if they got an investor. That's my advice.
That's awesome. That is great advice.
That was a tangent. Sorry.
No, you're good. That's important to know, though, and it's something good to think about because that's when those corners start being cut off because they need to be able to hand that profit off to somebody else because it might seem no duh, but the reason that people invest in companies is to make more money. And
yes.
As time goes on, they want more money, which means you have to cut off more corners, and totally get it.
Well, and I get it. I mean, and I'm not saying this to like get on my own soapbox or whatever, but producing pet food is incredibly hard. And for instance, producing the pet food the way that we produce pet food is incredibly hard. It takes 120% of all of our lives, right?
Right.
And so not doing that is incredibly difficult. And a lot of times the right thing is incredibly difficult, right? And it takes a certain type of person to want to do that. But so I get it from their perspective, but I just think that there's so much more value in saying, look, we do the best possible thing. It'll always be here. I think there'll always be a market for that rather than, trying to spread yourself into what's popular now and let's move it in these directions. So that's kind of my own personal take on it.
Yeah, I really, really like that point. And as an additional tangent here, because I've started producing some videos for this, for those of you guys that are out there that want to start doing similar type things and making pet-based businesses, that is something to also keep in mind when people start sending you messages saying, hey, I would like to sponsor you for A, B, or C, because then it's kind of the same situation. You lose a little bit of your control. You lose a little bit of the control over your message and what you want your message to be to the people that are out there. So in whatever realm it's in, as soon as money starts coming in from somebody else, you're losing something, whether that's quality, whether that's genuineness, whether that's control, whatever it is. So keep that in mind. Total tangent again, but
no, it makes sense. That's 100% true. And I could tell you, there are times you have to compromise, but you always want to have the freedom to be able to do if you're working in the industry, and creating content or as a pet food company, you always want the freedom to be able to do what you want to do to maintain that. And that's why, for instance, if somebody makes a joke or mentions, my boss selling Answers Pet Food, she always says over my dead body. So that's kind of that's just kind of, like I said, that's kind of our perspective on how to, hopefully, successfully run a very long-term pet food company.
I love it, which is why you need to take your job.
Yeah. And that problem is the way that we operate now is like, oh, you got a promotion, so you're doing this, but you still got to do all the other stuff you did. So
here's another hat.
Exactly. So it's kind of amazing actually. We only have like 10 people in the whole company,
which is crazy.
And most of them are family members outside of me, and I think we now have 2 part-time Amish women and 4 Amish guys who work at our plant now. But to give you an idea, my Jack and Roxanne, for the past 3 or 4 months, they've been working 85 hours a week at the plant, actually producing the food, because that's what we don't have, we need to get that up and running. And so the one funny thing Roxanne told me was that our shuttle conveyor broke down, that takes the patties to where you can put the boxes. So she was the shuttle conveyor for 8 hours. And so she just, every patty that went into the boxes touched her hands, you know, in terms of doing that. So
I love that. It sucks that they're having to put in 85 hours, but I love, it's a testament to what people can do when they really put their mind to something. Yeah. I mean, if 10 people are, you know, for the better part, running Answers Pet Food, imagine what you as an individual can do if there's something that you want to do. Whether that, I don't know what that is, that if you're watching this, I don't know what it is that you want to do, but I mean, if 10 people can produce Answers Pet Food and be one of the best pet foods on the planet, what can you do? Yeah. So yeah. I love that. I love that.
And if we can do it, anyone can do it.
Exactly.
That's what I think.
So coming back to AAFCO and off our awesome tangents, what do you think was the biggest news that came from these meetings? Was there a huge, big blowout game changer, whether that was from the pet food meeting, the labeling meeting? Was there a one big holy cow thing that happened this year?
Well, the thing I'll focus on, which I thought was really interesting, but before I say that, I will say I got a lot of crap this year because, so there's essentially one of the things you want to be there for is roll call, right? And so roll call is, the meeting is small enough, everyone stands up and says where they're from. You have to introduce yourself. I'm Billy from Answers Pet Food. And so it's an important thing, right? I slept through it for the first time ever. And it's at 8 a.m. and I woke up at 9 and I was like, what? And I got like 5 texts from Roxanne being like, where are you? Why are you not here? What's happening? And then like, of course, like I get in there and everyone's just staring at me. And I'm like, I'm sorry. But I was there, even if I'm not on the roll call sheet. So, in fact, I think Susan came up and slapped me on the back of the head and said, "You're late," when she was leaving the meeting. So, the number one thing that I thought was really strange at the meeting was they took up most of the ingredient definitions meeting talking about lab-grown meat, which is a very interesting concept. So it wasn't like a committee on. It wasn't like hey, let's make this something you can use in pet food yet. It was just kind of like, look, lab-grown meat is coming. There's pet food companies that are developing it. We need to have this on our radar, and we need to see sort of what we can do in terms of, for those of your people watching this that don't know what lab-grown meat is. Lab-grown meat is where you culture like a cell, and you grow a chicken breast or whatever it might be in a lab. So
it's just crazy. Total science fiction.
It's a hot topic, and I could tell you, there's 2 ways to look at it, right? Most people that are in favor of lab-grown meat are, looking at the ethical side of it, right? You don't have to, kill a chicken to get the chicken breast, right? You can just grow the chicken breast. Right. But that mindset I also find is accompanied by a very generalizing of nutrition generally. You hear a lot of, well, protein is protein. Well, that's not true, right? And also, animals are made up of much more than just protein. So that's what always kind of kills me. I think we talked about this when people say, what proteins do you use? Well, protein is just, right, it's just one small part of what makes up animal products. And so my reservation with lab-grown meat is the way that the nutrition in animal products is so dependent on essentially what you feed that animal, right? So does that cow eat grass? Does the chicken eat grass and bugs? So does that chicken get extra sunshine for extra vitamin D? All those things are so relevant to the actual nutrition. What is the omega-6-3 ratio of a chicken breast that's grown in a lab? I have no idea. Now, I'm not saying that couldn't be good, but I'm just saying, for me, it's been more about, hey, let's go back to the way things were done before, rather than saying, let's try to jump into something that we don't know what's coming. It's kind of like, GMOs or something like that, right? You have to I think, take a cautious look at these things. And I can guarantee the people who are developing it and the people who, and AAFCO are not going to take a cautious look.
Right. So, basically something to the effect of, this is interesting and I'm willing to listen to this, but I'm not willing to completely sign on and say I'm for this just because of the ethical benefits part of it. It sounds like a good idea. Let's look into it and see what comes from it, but I'm not willing to say I'm totally on board with this without more information.
Well, yeah, I mean, every decision you make should be, evidence-based. Right. And so it's just one of those, it's one of those things. And meat is a morally, I love philosophy, and meat is one of those morally gray areas that you look at, in terms of, now we're feeding carnivores and obligate carnivores. And so you kind of have an obligation to feed them their native
what they're
diet.
Supposed to eat.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, but meat is one of those morally gray areas. And what I think that people don't really, what people should do more of is take the ethical side and take the nutrition side, and then reach somewhere that you feel comfortable, right? It's not exactly right to say, and again, this is another tangent, but it's so,
we're never going to have a short video, man.
Exactly. So humans are omnivores, right? And so people say they can survive, they can thrive off plant or animals, right? But I would actually argue it's plant and animals, right? And or are two way different words when put in between, those two other words. Right. And so it's not as easy as saying, a dog or a cat or any other mammal can get all the nutrients they need from either doing a plant-based diet or doing a meat-based diet. Therefore, we can just focus on the ethical part of it, because nutrition is so much more complicated than that, right? And animal products and plants are two totally different sources, even if they have the same nutrient value. So, for instance, if you said, I'm going to eat soybeans because they have 5 grams of protein per serving, or I could eat this egg that has 6 grams of protein per serving, that protein is not anywhere near the same thing, right? Bioavailability-wise, it's not anywhere near the same thing. And so with the lab-grown meat, I totally understand it, because I want animals, especially animals that are consumed for food, to live as ethically, the best life that they possibly can. But I'm also not willing to say, like, well, it's meat, so it'll be good for them. Well, let's look at the factors before we jump in and say whether it's good or bad.
Right. And with a new science like growing meat, I mean, that's a deep look kind of situation. Now, we're feeding this instead of that. It's like, no, we're taking a cell and we're making a ribeye or something like that,
Exactly.
It's crazy. It's totally crazy. So, and one applicable example of this, hearing something new and then doing some more research and then making a change based off what you're seeing, is I originally heard about this increased organ content thing that we talked about in our last video together in one of my live streams from a follower. Like, have you heard of this 20% organ thing? I'm like, well, no, I haven't. So then I went and looked at it a little bit more. Then we had our discussion, and after becoming informed, then made a decision to make a change. So I totally agree with the aspect of saying, this is interesting, let's take a look at it, then learning more about it, and then making a decision for it, instead of just saying, oh, 2020 or 20% is supposed to be better. Cool, let's do that.
Well, yeah, and the other part about it is, let's not beat ourselves up for, I feed, we formulate a food, because you can get into a lot of debates about what is an organ, right?
Yep. Because
an organ is any grouping of cells that perform a function. So it's literally almost anything in your body could be considered an organ. So then you go to what is nutritionally an organ, all these different things. But let's not beat each other up, because if you're feeding Answer's food and it's 30% organ, if you're home feeding your dog and it's 80-10-10 or I think I say now 80-10, 5-5 or something, you know, you're still doing great. So like, just let's not like be so rigid about how we, you know, I mean, I'll give you an example of this. My dog commonly gets half of her diet as raw milk every day, right? Which is totally different than 80-10-10, than 60-30-10. It's totally different than all those things. And that comes from the experience that we've had with all, you know, tens of thousands of animals across the country. But there's different ways to do it. And let's not just dismiss something outright just because we had a preconceived idea. Because if you do that, then you're not practicing science.
I totally agree. And this is why I always tell people at the end of, whether it's my course, my book, one-on-one calls, in my live streams, wherever, is to don't shut your mind and just get on one track of like, for years and years, I was the guy that was in raw feeding groups saying dogs can't, like vegetables and fruits have no place whatsoever. They shouldn't be in there. I was that guy for years. And then because I didn't close my mind to it, and I looked at information that was coming out, I'm like, okay, well now I'm totally on board with vegetables, especially fermented vegetables, because I've seen this new information, I've seen the evidence, and I'm willing to make a change because I've seen the evidence for this. So if you don't take away anything from this video other than this, it's don't shut your mind to new information, because we learn new stuff every day. And if you put yourself in that box, the only thing that you're doing a service is your ego, not you, not your pet. It just don't close your mind off to new information. When you see something new, look into it. See if it's for you. Is 20% better for you? Is lab-grown meat better for you? I don't know, but look into it.
Exactly. So, and it's funny because I was thinking to myself, so you're the reason I left raw feeding groups.
It could have been.
No, just for the record, the only reason I did was because I do it for a living, and I need, you know, I can't be doing that at night too. I gotta shut off at some point, or my wife will kill me.
No, dude, I totally get it. There is a reason that Kimberly left her group, because it was just too much. It's a lot. Like, it's a lot, having to do all the normal business, day-to-day stuff, but then going, all right, well, there's 17,000 people in this group that are looking to hear from me today and have tagged me and this and that. So I don't blame you at all, because it's like having a part-time job.
Exactly. And I definitely do not need a part-time job.
No, you don't. So is there one major takeaway, whether that's just information or actionable item, that actual consumers, the pet parents that are watching this video, can do, should look into? You know, is there one piece of advice that comes from all this AAFCO meeting this year that the pet parents out there should do, read up on, be aware of? You know, one important takeaway from this year's AAFCO meeting.
Well, I mean, I think that the important takeaway is that it's getting better. You know, there's more of a movement from people who want to look at things, you know, from a more holistically minded aspect. And that it's only going to get better if people continue to get involved. So, you know, if you're a retailer, you know, reach out to Chelsea Kent, who has an organization that actually, and by the way, if you want to find her store, it's called The Heroes in Littleton, Colorado. She has an organization for retailers to have a voice there. So maybe you get a membership there and support her and have a voice in AAFCO. Or if you are wanting to, you know, have a voice as a consumer, you know, support someone like Susan Thixton, and actually, you know, take the time to write her and say, this is what is important to me. And that doesn't cost $500 to do, right? And say, this is what's important to me. Will you please make sure that, you know, this is being addressed at AAFCO, and that kind of thing. And then, you know, if you ever watch something like this and you find out that you don't like something, it doesn't hurt as well to call your state regulators. Find out who the feed control official is in your state and call them or email them and say, I don't like this, and you represent me. So that's another thing I think is the biggest takeaway, is we can have a voice there, you know, kind of moving forward.
I love that. And on that note, the last thing that I have written down for this agenda, my list of questions, etc. And you actually brought this up at the beginning. Thing maybe we can talk about this is there a way for, other than the ways that we do this so often, we've done these interviews twice, but so many times throughout these interviews where you start talking about something that I have written down as the next agenda item. So you just went through a ton of ways that people.
Oh, there you go.
But is there something specific that people can do to maybe start talking about, or maybe we need to do another video on this or something about getting those 500 people at the 2019 AAFCO session?
That's a good question, because we kind of talked about that a little bit at the AAFCO meeting, and we said, how do we get people to do this? But maybe one of the people watching this wants to spearhead that. I think a lot of times what happens is, I know in my case, I would like to do more, and I just simply don't have the time, right? And I'm sure a lot of people are like that, but there may be someone who does. And so maybe you want to be the person who starts the campaign to be able to do that. Or maybe you want to reach out to, me or Susan or anyone who goes to these AAFCO meetings and say, hey, let's make a big change there. Maybe someone in Louisville or whatever happens in terms of doing that. But I would say the other thing too is, being as informed as possible and helping your neighbors and friends. If you know about these issues and you have this information and you know someone who loves, you got to be careful with unsolicited advice,
Yeah, you do.
But, people love their dogs and cats. I don't have to tell you that, right? Obviously they love their animals. And so people who are feeding grocery store food that is regulated by AAFCO don't love their dogs any less than I do. They just don't have the right information. And so being informed and telling your, friends who want to hear the information, and maybe you change that animal to a better dry food. Well, that's a great thing. That's a great thing. Maybe you feed, maybe you get them to change to making their own food or whatever you want to do. Those are ways that you can affect, you can have a single victory. So when I do a nutrition consultation, and a dog, let's say, has, chronic yeast issues for years and years and years, and then they don't anymore. That's a single victory that I could say, I made a difference for that one animal. If I don't do anything else, that animal's not in pain anymore. And so I would say people, just get educated and share it.
Yes. And on the unsolicited advice thing, one thing that I have found, if you want to do that, is instead of saying, this is what you're doing wrong, say something more like, oh, did you know that this thing is great too? Like, my neighbors have a dog that is, I was surprised to hear it, but I'm pleasantly surprised, is fed a half and half diet of dry food and fresh food.
Yeah.
And just over time, through those discussions, I was able to say, oh, did you know that adding in reproductive foods like eggs can really help and really be a nutritional benefit? Here's half a dozen eggs from our chickens in the backyard. Just, add them in slowly. Or did you know that you can do this? Did you know that you can do that? So instead of attacking them and saying, do you know how bad Purina is? Or something like that, say, oh, hey, I have chickens in the backyard. Do you want some chickens to add to their food?
That's great. That's great advice. And I think it's important to remember that everyone's been there. Everyone has been somewhere where they weren't doing the right thing for their animal. So, it's you can sympathize with anyone's position.
Yep. Well, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Billy, where can people find you? Where's the best place to hook up with Billy? Maybe they want one of those one-on-one consultations or something like that. What is the best way to connect with Billy and Answers Pet Food? So,
we have, obviously, like AnswersPetFood.com. We have a website called Answers4Veterinarians.com, and where we like to post case studies with regards to specific health issues. I also have a live class this Thursday, but we have a YouTube channel called Answers Academy, in which we do just general nutrition training and how it pertains to Answers Pet Food. And also, a few things when you get on my calendar. My calendar for September and October is absolutely ridiculous in terms of travel. And this stuff will be on our social media. So the best way to know where I'm going to be is to follow Facebook, because that's kind of where we get out. Our marketing person kind of, puts infographics together. But I'll be doing a pet food event in Portland on September 15th. I'm speaking at some stores in Portland over the 16th and 17th. I will be speaking at the Lucas and Berube Healthy Pet Summit in October, and that is October 13th. So you can catch me there. I'm also speaking at some stores in one store in St. Petersburg and one store in Tampa Bay in October 1st and 2nd, and then I'll also be doing R&DS in Chicago, which is the Raw Dog Summit that Dogs Naturally puts on, which is the weekend of November 2nd. So I'm all over the country in September and October, and that's just what we have so far. So maybe a few added on, but stay tuned to Answers Facebook for more information on that.
So basically, Answers Facebook page and everywhere in the country that is doing anything with natural dog and cat food.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Billy. I really appreciate your time. But most importantly, everybody, remember that you don't have to be perfect to be an amazing dog owner. You just have to do your best every day and try to improve as you go forward. Peace. Thanks, Billy.
Thank you. Have a good night.